The escalating war in the Middle East has heightened growing concerns about further civilian suffering and displacement in the region and far beyond. UN agencies reported on this today, and 7 days since Israeli and U.S. bombing in Iran prompted ongoing counter-strikes across the Middle East. Humanitarians confirmed massive upheaval in Lebanon, with hundreds of shelters now full, as whole suburbs of Beirut have been emptied. For more on this, let's now bring in SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, and he now comes to us straight from the U.S. And Sherwin, just talking about, what took place last week, tomorrow will officially now be 7 days since the conflict began. Maybe let's start off with just the latest in terms of this conflict. What do we know so far when it comes to the Israeli, U.S. as well as the Iran war?
As with all wars in Bali, the cost to civilians in the main it seems to be a very acute concern moving forward here. Civilians trying to leave the area, so many Americans caught up in the melee. Given those surprise strikes by Israel and Iran a week ago, as you've said, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of Americans seeking to leave the area and not being able to do that via commercial means because for the longest period the airspace had been closed. And so you've seen this escalation by the U.S. administration led by the State Department seeking to get their citizens out of the region via chartered aircraft. And that is an ongoing process. Of course, it's logistically very difficult to move people in and out, cargo in and out of a region where the airspace has been closed. But we're seeing slowly but surely that the airspace is being reopened again. Of course, the human cost here, you talk about the number of casualties. Over 200 people have now been killed in Lebanon. You talk about the emphasis in southern Lebanon, Beirut in particular, where Hezbollah has been firing at Israel in reaction to the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei. You're also hearing about over 1,000 people have been killed in Iran. You've heard about the 6 service people that have been killed in terms of the United States, about 11 people killed in Israel. So the human cost here becomes more and more acute as this war drags on. And as it drags on in Bali, the cost, of course, becomes a very pertinent issue here. How much does it cost to maintain this level of engagement, right? There's a think tank in Washington called the Center for Strategic and International Studies that estimates that at the current rate, it's costing the United States over $800 million to prosecute this war against Iran on a daily basis. In addition to that, we are getting reports that the price of jet fuel in just the last 7 days has increased by 58%, and that eventually gets passed on to the consumer. You hear from the United Nations in Bali in terms of the closing of airspaces and the moving of humanitarian cargo in that region. The airspace is disrupting humanitarian rotations, they tell us. If energy routes like the Strait of Hormuz and other maritime corridors are closed for an indefinite period of time, food prices, we are told, are going to soar, health systems will be squeezed, and basic supplies will tighten in countries that rely on imports. So the cost here is very, very much acute. And the ripple effects around the world is of great concern. And again, if you look at the markets today in the United States, the Dow fell by 600 points earlier this morning. All the indices are in the red, and that becomes a concern for companies and people, investors around the world, depending, of course, of how long we go here.
And certainly, Sherwin, you painting a picture there that this has major ripple effects when it comes to the state of the economy worldwide. And at the same time, what are we hearing from U.S. President Donald Trump in terms of trying to find a peace deal to end this war?
Well, there is no indication from the president or his secretary of state that spoke yesterday. There's almost a giddy way in which they are presenting this war. You know, they talk about how the leaders in Iran are toast, and just the narrative emanating from the leadership here in terms of those prosecuting this war really raises a lot of concern about the tenor in which the United States is presenting this conflict. Given the background that there has been this tussle within the United States Congress, demonstrating reiterating that there is no monolithic view in terms of the prosecution of this war in the United States. People and politicians in particular are very much divided about why the United States had to do this in Iran right now. You asked me what President Donald Trump has been saying. I'll give you the latest that he posted on his Truth Social platform. He says, there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender, and that after that, and the selection of a great and acceptable leader, we and many of our wonderful and very brave allies and partners will work tirelessly to bring Iran back from the brink of destruction, making it economically bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. Iran will have a great future. Make Iran great again. MIGA, right? A play off his Make America Great Again. And I'll tell you, yesterday he did interviews, Mbali, with the Axios News website and with the Reuters news website, and he told both those publications that he wants to be and needs to be personally involved in selecting the next leader of Iran. Of course, the Iranians are certainly not going to fold in that regard, and they too have said that they are prepared for a long fight here. So where we go from here in the absence of mediators, right? I spoke to an expert earlier this week at the International Crisis Group, Dr. Richard Gowan, and he explained that unfortunately, due to Iran's retaliatory strikes that have been targeting some of the Gulf countries in that region, a viable mediator would have been those very Gulf countries that are now caught up in the melee. So in terms of where we go in terms of mediation moving forward, that's anybody's guess. It seems that this will come down to the United States determining that it is, it is time for them to stop the prosecution of this war. So essentially, this will be a decision for the President of the United States.
And we'll continue to monitor that.